Juliana, do you want to quickly just give a little thumbnail sketch of your wonderful paper?
Okay. Well, I think first for me is how I've been trying to work in writing, which is to really bring attention, start from practice and from experience, but doing that, trying to craft narratives that move very close to how it felt to live the scenes that we live in collaboratively with others in our different contexts we are involved. So I think this is the starting point that I've been very curious and interested, I think, for the past decade, I could say. And in this particular article, I think I was really trying to also say how do we bring our attention to say can we pay attention to these things that are very difficult to speak of, to remember, even to notice at the time, but that I've come to appreciate as really making a difference to a kind of collaborative practice that I've been involved. And so I think I would say perhaps this would be the starting point I would make about the article.
One thing that really struck me was your almost forensic attention to detail and that real sort of exploration of what does this mean. One of the things that really struck a chord with me that, you know, in action research we often talk about first, second, third person research or different cycles, and I thought you really focus on what it was that you were doing in the moment of doing it and what it actually meant. And I think for me it challenged some of those orthodoxies of action research in very helpful ways. I don't know if that struck a chord with you.
Yes, I think I think we are we have so much resource available already that accounts for experience in terms of processes and cycles, and which are all very helpful. But I think I'm always trying to look for this to go earlier, to start earlier before we make these distinctions. What is going on in our experience before we make that move? And I think it's a question also that I'd be interesting to then hear from practitioners who engage with the article. Do they also feel this makes a difference? Do they also miss this, that we can account for our practices in this way and pay attention in this way? And in my experience working a lot with communities of practice and practitioners in different organizational contexts, I feel that it's the last thing we expect of each other when we go to speak of practice and learn and exchange. The last thing that we expect, that we share how it felt like to navigate a scene, rather than account for it in terms of already thought through and offered and laid out ways of thinking about what happened. That, like I said, are also all very helpful. But I feel there is something that is to do with presence, with embodied knowledge, with moving with events, that asks for this other kind of attention.
Okay.
It's quite paradoxical, isn't it, to invite people to experience in the raw without frameworks that kind of support that understanding. You know, it's quite a bold move in a way, and I suppose a lot of the time I'm supporting practitioners to learn how to do what they do, and I know that I always fall back on a whole list of structures and frameworks and tools, because that's what they think they need. And very often I find myself saying, well, you know, it's like bricolage. You just grab whatever tools to hand and build walls with, you know, what you find lying around. But I suppose, you know, what would you say to that kind of paradox of, you know, you talk in the paper about a craft of this, and it's quite hard to craft something without learning how to craft. So how do you learn to do something without just falling back on all of the usual kind of suspects of, you know, structures like first, second and third person and cycles of action research?
Well, I think to answer from my own experience, how I've learned, I think, or how I'm learning, how I keep learning. I think writing, like I advocate in the paper, is one of them. So to play with writing detailed narratives, and I think this is a practice. It doesn't come. And I think the more, so I think this is very key distinction as well, to say the writing is not a post, like, I'm not saying that as representative, but like of experience. But the more I found that the more I was honing my writing of narratives, the more I was paying attention as well to experience. And the more I was paying attention to experience, the more I was able to write the accounts. And so I think I would take this. I mean, there are other things that would help, like for bodily, like I learned first with Patricia, and then found a way of taking that also with students in Brazil to work with the tango, the dance, and the body to bring our attention to the subtle moves that happen between people. So different kinds of practices and that helped me to hone. But I think what I focus on in the article that I think is at the center for me is it's writing itself.
Maybe I could, I just think it's very interesting what you're talking about, Juliana, and James, about what is it, because it's not really raw experience that Juliana brings in this article. You say it's actually very honed in the narrative, and it's, I think, this discipline of what is involved, instead of providing structure through a theoretical frame, how does structure appear through progressive iteration, so that every time you write a narrative, it reveals, it's revelatory, it shows you something about the meaning of the experience, because somehow with every iteration you draw in more contextual information. And then as you iterate it again, that same process repeats. And what I think is interesting is that through that successive work, what might start off as something that appears to be so idiosyncratically individual and personal starts to be infused with a much larger recognizable context, so that other people very rapidly can connect to the story and associate it to precise experiences of their own. And I feel this links back to what you said earlier about how Juliana's article offers an alternative to the first, second, third person way of thinking about how we might consider the difference between purely individual research and something that appears to be third person and more generalizable. Can we get to generalizable through this other method?
I think to to make a very briefly to make a link with also something I pick up on the article, which is this link with arts and with the novel writer and novel writing. And I think in literary writing, the more particular you go, the more universal is the experience of the reading. And so I think this is a bit what we're talking about when I hear Patricia speaking. I think there is that we are not, the more particular we go, we're not being individual. We're going into the experience, but actually it then opens to a connection where that resonates, that works by resonance.
Which is the essence of having an artful approach to organizational change, because that, you know, people become an artist in the change process, as in an author, a writer, whatever their practice is. You know, you talk about your practice through writing, Juliana, and I think everybody has their own practice and they cobble together or their own kind of crazy paved of approaching, you know, how they go about, you know, change in the world, small, big, medium, and you know, that in itself is an artistic process. It's one that we can learn from novels and painters and other people who do art for the sake of art.
One of the things that struck me about your work is that in reading it, I could almost live in the words and between the words. So I take exactly what you mean, Patricia, is that quality of I can relate to the story about the bookstore. I've never been to that bookstore, but I can relate very much to it. And one of the things that you know, in terms of the review process, what I think is really interesting about was the question that was raised to me and that came through to you, Juliana, about, is this action research? This is really, really good, but is this action research? And I'm thinking, well, it is action research. It's just we're talking about it in a different way. And that's what I really liked about your paper. It really shone a very bright light on some of the orthodoxies and ways of thinking about action research in a very helpful way, which is why I was keen on yours being at the third paper of the 5, being the sort of central one in that. If anybody ever reads the journal as a physical object, they will see where it is located, and that's not by accident.
You know, there's something about practice or participation, actually, is what I really wanted to say. That you know, that sometimes I've heard people talk about action research, and they're really just going and talking to people and writing it down, and not really taking a mindset of participation, of really connecting with whatever it is and seeing themselves as a co-subject of what they're researching. That for me is the essence of action research, is, you know, throwing away this idea that we can be dispassionate observers, which in a way is why we're in the ecological and organizational messes we're in, because we think we can hold things at arm's length and not actually really be part of it. And what I think your paper really did, which really excited me when I first read it, was invite people to really see what participation with something that you're researching could mean, in the same way that, you know, Clarice Lispector writes about and you know, owns up her position as the writer, as the author, when she's writing about meeting the guy on the bus. You know, that's not dispassionately observing it, being right there in the process of making the moment become real.
Yes, she's right in the middle of what she's trying to see. She's seeing it, but she's immersed in it, and I think this is the I think this is the challenge, then, isn't it? How can we pay attention, notice, being immersed and not being removed. Not being removed, can be removed, but without making that attempt to remove ourselves and speak as if we are. And so I think this is the challenge, because we are, well, bit things that we know, but to say the obvious, I think that we are all too used to working from that perspective of being removed.
Yes.
Out of interest, Juliana, it's been a few months now since you've finished the article and going through the rather long process that is academic publishing. Where are you now with your thinking and thoughts about this?
I think I am, well, where I am at the moment is I'm still really interested in the relationship with writing and are paying attention. And I am working, so this is very raw, but I'm working with particular metaphors and images, so to say, that can help offer us a different way of imagining ourselves as practitioners. Well, that's a question. Will it help? But that can offer us ways of accounting for work that is more liminal, where we are experiencing ourselves on the edge, and precisely this that we were just talking about, this relationship between being immersed but also being able to notice, and then what are the risks of that, the risks of being too immersed as well. So I think I'm playing. That's the current playground I'm in.
Wonderful. In drawing it to a close, James, Patricia, do you have any thoughts?
I'd just like to say thank you, really, for the paper, because I really enjoyed it and appreciated it, and it was really lovely to read something that just, like one of those rare papers where you kind of go, yes, I really wish I'd said that. That's exactly what I've been thinking, and I've never really been able to quite put my finger on it, and you really put your finger on it. So yeah. I appreciated reading.
I think what I would say is how important we've recognised it's been in helping the development of what we're interested in, real researcher practitioners. How the process of producing an article about something that it is at the core of what you think you're doing, which I think is what Juliana did with this, how great it was to be able to go through the process of getting that publication with both of you, because I think it's enormously developed your ability, Juliana, to see what you want to say, and to work out how to do that within the limitations and constraints which must be there. I mean, I think it's been extraordinarily productive in you maturing as a researcher practitioner.
Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. And I think this, to have this openness, to have the restraint, and at the same time the openness to explore, to go on a track that it's not a conventional. So I think I really appreciate that.